Hi, Don Garbutt here. This is part 2 in the two-part series on the sample and hold capabilities of Spektrumsynth. Hopefully you saw part 1 where I explained the function of sample and hold. Sample and hold is a control source that will enable us to create patterns that are random and semi-ordered, and we can use those control patterns to control things like filter cutoff points, pulse width modulation, wave shape selection, panning, and many other functions. Let's take a look at some of the fun we can have with sample and hold. I'm going to start with an initialization patch called Solo Oscillator 1 init. This is one of the simplest starting points, and I can walk you through the sample and hold setup. Here we're listening to a pulse wave coming from Solo Oscillator 1. It's sent to filter 1 by this control here. Its volume is turned up, and volume control for this oscillator is selected by choosing an envelope generator and assigning it to the Solo Oscillator 1's volume control. Let's use sample and hold to control the pitch of the oscillator, running it in oscillator sync mode. Activate the sync. The amount control adjusts the intensity of the sync from off to soft and to hard sync. A recognizable usage of the synced oscillator is when its pitch is controlled by an envelope generator. I'm going to make that assignment here. Target Solo Oscillator 1 pitch, source envelope generator 2. Make sure the fader is to the left because we're going to the upper targets. Give it some range. All the incoming messages from Grand Central Station, which will include the sample and hold messages, can be scaled by this controller here. To make it a bit more glorious, let's go to the B panel and switch these voices into unison mode. Solo Oscillator 1 and the sync oscillator as well. The glide value for the sync oscillator is found here. Right, now let's crank up the sample and hold. Select the sample and hold module from this macro here. As I mentioned in the first tutorial, the sample and hold will sample from the noise generator, LFO 13, and LFO 8. I've also added an LFO 11 option here. Of the various clock sources, let's use LFO number 9. Because LFO 8 is used as an input source for the sample and hold process, let's make sure that we've switched it on and turned up its output range, and its rate can be controlled by clock sync and subdivisions of the clock, or you can run it free. You'll see the clock sync becomes activated when I press play on my DAW. We need to switch on 3 more LFOs. The clock LFO number 9 is found in the polyphonic LFO section over here. So we'll choose LFO 9 and switch it on, and we have to set up LFO 9 in a proper way to make it a proper clock source for the sample and hold process. To set it to sync to the DAW, click on BPM, and if you double click here, then this number 24 relates to 24 out of 96 clock pulses per bar. If we set the division number to 1, then we get 1 cycle per quarter note. If we set this to 12, then we get eighth notes. And as mentioned in the previous tutorial, we have to set this to a square wave with a very narrow trigger pulse. A couple of other minor adjustments to make on LFO 9. Since we switched on unison mode, we have to actually use unison gate mode on the LFO for all the voices of the unison to simultaneously trigger their respective cycles of the LFO. And we also want LFO 9, the clock source, to begin its cycle with each key played. And while we're over here, let's turn on LFOs 11 and 13. If we set 13 into sync mode, that means it'll trigger from the key depression. This will be very useful in the sample and hold process. Just the sustained tone, let's add some envelope generator pulsing on the volume. Let's change the envelope generator to envelope generator 11, one of the multi-breakpoint ones. And we'll select envelope generator 11 and just choose a simple sawtooth pattern from the menu. And select the rate multiplier to 2. And also, because we are in unison mode, we'll set the unison gate mode on envelope generator 11 so that it triggers from all of the voices. Here's an example of a patch from the sample and hold folder, in which sample and hold is controlling wave shape selection in the wavetable synthesis section, It's also controlling the comb filter cutoff movement and the cutoff movement of solo filter number 1. I'm also using arpeggiation for several of the sound components. Here we've got sample and hold controlling 2 different filters, and we've also got sample and hold controlling some panning position on oscillator 1's filter. So this sound is comprised of the 2 solo oscillators and the wavetable section, where the wavetable section is also following sample and hold control. You can clearly hear the patterns change as I move around the sources. This next patch is using range modulation. The ranges of the sample and hold control are actually controlled from the movement on the animator pad. In addition, the input position on the sample and hold grid is also controlled from the Y movement on the animator pad. And here's one more example from the sample and hold folder. Here we have a step sequencer modulating the rate of LFO13, which is one of the sources in the sample and hold process. I hope you enjoyed this mini-series on sample and hold. See you on the next one.